Hey everyone, it's Heather Nichols. I have another Christmas in July card to share with you today, and we have a new tool in the Tailored Expressions store that makes creating this card with layered stencils really quick and easy. Let's start off with some supplies that I used to create this card, but especially the new Grid Placemat that you're going to love using in your workspace. I'll give you more details on that new product in just a minute. The stencil set I used for my project is the Modern Holly Layered Stencil Set. It comes with 3 pieces to create the multicolored design. For the sentiment on my project, I used the Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas sentiment from the Handlettered Holiday 2 stamp set, along with the coordinating die. I'll be doing masking on my project with some stamping mask paper. For ink colors for my stenciling, I'll be using Cilantro, Lime Zest, and Cherry Pop inks along with my blender brushes. I'll be using Oreo ink to stamp my sentiment. I always love splatters, and I'll add those with Sugar Cube ink refill, an acrylic block, and a water brush. I'm adding glitter with some of the Stickles Moon Dust Gel and the Nuvo Media Spatula, and of course Pixie Spray to hold my stencils in place. I used moss and cranberry felt along with the flower dies from the Winter Greens die collection to create flower embellishments. I'll also add white rhinestones to those. And finally, for a liquid adhesive, I'm using Multimedia Matte. I'm starting off by stamping the Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas sentiment onto a piece of Toffee cardstock using Oreo ink. I'll place the stamp onto the cardstock where I would like it to go. I'll close the lid of the MISTI to pick up that stamp, and I'll ink that stamp up with Oreo ink and then close the lid of the MISTI to stamp the sentiment onto the Toffee cardstock. Next, I'm going to mask off the sentiment that I just stamped on the Toffee cardstock. I'll use the coordinating die and I'll cut it from a piece of the stamping mask paper. When you're die cutting something out of the stamping mask paper, remember that the white side is the right side and the blue is the backing paper. Once I ran the sentiment die cut through the die cut machine, I peeled off that blue backing and placed it right over the sentiment that I stamped on the Toffee cardstock. All right, let's talk about that grid placemat I showed you at the beginning of the video. It has a gridded design, and then in the center there are guides for placing your A2 size card in a horizontal or vertical format. The other guideline is a 6x6 square, which perfectly fits our Tailored Expressions stencils. There's also some measurement guides down the side, a place to take notes, and in general, this is just a really great placemat to put into your workspace. On the bottom of the placemats, there's a bunch of fun, different crafty quotes that I know you're going to love. I love the one on the top that says, "Of course I talk to myself when I craft. Sometimes I need expert advice." It's so true, right? Okay, let me show you how to use the grid placemat with a layered stencil set. I added adhesive right to the placemat so that I can add my cardstock to it and it won't move around. And then I'm adding my stamped Toffee cardstock piece right into that vertical guide on the placemat. When you're using your stencils, make sure the Tailored Expressions is the bottom left corner, and that will make sure that everything lines up perfectly. I did add Pixie Spray to the back of my stencils, and now I'm taking my first stencil from the Modern Holly layered set and I'm adding that to the grid placemat, aligning it with the guide that's printed on the placemat. I'm using my blender brushes along with Lime Zest ink to add color to the leaves through this first stencil. I'll peel up the stencil once I have the color all applied, making sure that masking paper stays stuck down. Pixie Spray does tend to stick to it a bit, so just be aware that you need to make sure that that's pressed down as you peel the stencil off. I'll add the next stencil, make sure that the Tailored Expressions is in the bottom left-hand corner, and then line it up with the guide printed right on the grid paper. And you don't need to worry necessarily about the extra alignment squares on the side of the stencil. The grid paper does all of the work for you. After I have the stencil lined up on the grid paper, I'm using Cilantro ink with my blender brush to add the next color of the Modern Holly layered stencil set. Once I'm done with that color, I'll peel back that stencil, again paying attention to that masking paper so it stays attached to my original piece. And then I'll add that third stencil, the berry stencil, and I'm lining that up with the printed guide on the grid paper. This one I'm going to do with Cherry Cranberry Pop ink, and then I wanted to add a little bit of sparkle, so I used the Nichols Moondust glitter gel and did that right over the top of the berries after I had added the color with my blender brushes. I peeled back that last stencil, and then I also peeled back that masking paper to reveal the sentiment underneath, and then I'll let this dry. The Nichols glitter gel probably takes a good half an hour to an hour to dry, so I'll just set this aside until it's ready to go. After everything is dry, I'm adding a few splatters of sugar cube ink. I'm using the sugar cube ink refill and adding a drop of that to an acrylic block. I'll use a water brush to pick up the ink, and then I'll tap that water brush over my finger to add splatters to my project. For an embellishment around my sentiment, I'm going to be cutting some flowers from Cranberry felt. The flowers I'm using are from the Winter Greens die collection, but you can use any other flower die that you have that will work for just a little something extra on your project. So I'm taking the dies and I'm setting them on that Cranberry felt, and then I'm just sending them through my Sidekick machine. All right, let's put this card together. I added stitching to the top and bottom of my stenciled piece with my sewing machine, and I'll take this and I'll add this to a sugar cube card base. I'll use liquid adhesive to add white rhinestones to the centers of my flower die cuts from the Cranberry felt, and then I'll use that liquid adhesive again to attach the flowers around the sentiment on the card. Once I had the flowers attached, I did decide that I needed something just a little bit extra, so I went ahead and die cut the flowers one more time from the moss felt, and then I just trimmed out a few of the petals to use as leaves with the flowers. I hope you enjoyed my Christmas in July card using the Modern Holly layered stencil, as well as the new Grid Placemat that's now available at Tailored Expressions. I loved sharing how to use the layered stencil sets with the Grid Placemats, and I hope that you'll give it a try too. All the supplies that I used to create this card are found in the Tailored Expressions web store at tailoredexpressions.com. Thanks so much for joining me, everybody, and I'll see you next time.